Dark Dove back with you again. I've just I'm in the process of shooting 2 videos. I've just shot my Give Me 10 response in advance to Pretty Big Stir. So this is I'm just doing a general update now. I'm going to show some stuff I picked up at 2 recent record fairs. Yes. Been going to quite a few fairs recently, picking up a lot of nice stuff. Okay, a fair recently here in Cork, which I went to, didn't pick up much. I was talking about this fair before, that it's really a fair that's kind of gone downhill a lot in the last year or so. But I did make a couple of pickups. A seller whom I've bought a few things from in the past. I've made a few nice pickups here and there, but this is something that, okay, the minute I saw this, grabbed it with both hands. Syd Barrett, the Madcap Laughs and the Barrett. Now this is, okay, this is a 1974 double compilation of Syd Barrett's 2 solo albums, the Madcap Laughs and Barrett. This Madcap Laughs came out in 1970, and I think Barrett maybe the following year, I think. This is a 1974 compilation on Harvest Records, which combines the 2 records. Now, this copy, which I bought, actually is missing the Barrett disc, so it only has the Madcap Laughs. Now, Madcap Laughs is an album which I've been looking for. Ideally, yes, it would have been ideal if it had both albums on it. But I got it fairly cheap because of the fact that it was missing the other disc. So yes, this is Madcap Laughs, Syd Barrett's debut album. Yeah, so for those of you, yeah, I presume most of you are familiar with the story of Syd Barrett. You know, he was in the early lineup of Pink Floyd, and things went to unravel for him from a mental health perspective. He was kicked out of Pink Floyd. He released these 2 albums soon after. Madcap Laughs, yes, kind of reminiscent of his work with Pink Floyd, but lyrics are just absolutely, I mean, they could be seen as a kind of example of, psychedelia, kind of psychedelic surrealism, or they could be seen as a symptom of schizophrenia, basically, which is what he was suffering from, and which he would continue to suffer from for the rest of his life. So it's a very compelling album, but it's also quite as this kind of disturbing undercurrent running through it as well. As this is missing one of the, as it's missing the other disc, I got this for a fairly okay price. I got another album kind of more or less thrown in for free with it. Now this was in the bargain section, but now it's an album that I'd actually been looking for, but because it's in pretty poor condition, I got it kind of more or less thrown in for free with the Syd Barrett. That is Magazine, Secondhand Daylight Magazine, Manchester post-punk band, formed by former Buzzcocks vocalist, the original Buzzcocks vocalist, Howard Devoto. This was their 2nd album, and it came out in 1979 on Virgin. Now there's some, as I said, it's not in great condition, and I the best track on it, it plays mostly fine until the very final track, Permafrost, when it just skips like crazy, and you can't actually play that track on it, which is a shame, because that's actually, I think, the strongest track on the album. But I mean, I can't complain. I got it more or less for free. So and it's a hard enough album as well to find, but it's kind of it's regarded this as a filler copy until perhaps I pick up a copy in better condition. So those were the two pickups from that particular seller on that day. Now, last Sunday, I travelled to Limerick to meet VC stalwart Ben Costello in his hometown of Limerick. So travelled up to the record fair which was taking place there in the city's Milk Market, which is a big open air market. Quite a few sellers. Okay, so I'll start off with the first two items which I bought from one particular seller. Is a guy called Doc, who's I've bought a lot of stuff from often in the past. Browsing through his stock, and I came across an album which I've seen in the wild quite a bit. Been kind of curious about it, never pulled the trigger on it, but I decided what the hell, I'll take a chance, because and that is Mahavishnu, well, John McLoughlin, or Mahavishnu as he was going under at this point, and Carlos Santana, Love, Devotion and Surrender. This was released on CBS in 1973. This is, both of them are actually at this point going through after joining this guy, what's his name, some kind of Indian spiritual leader, Sri Chimnoy, I think his name was. But the two of them had become devotees of this particular, I think it was some kind of Hindu. I'm not 100% sure anyway, but anyway, this album was kind of it's basically a kind of a tribute as well to John Coltrane, because there's a couple of there's a cover of A Love Supreme. John Coltrane's A Love Supreme on this. The results of this album are a little mixed. I don't know. Santana himself, his style is slightly bombastic style for Coltrane tribute. McLoughlin perhaps better suited with his style, but it's an album of mixed results, but still I think it's one worth grabbing still. This is, by the way, this is an absolutely superb copy. I just have to point out, I don't know if you can hear that creak when you open the gatefold. That is an indication of an album that hasn't been that's almost new, but it's like it's 40, nearly 45 years old. Still has the inner sleeve, and it's absolutely superb condition. It looks barely played. So an album I'd seen around in a while a lot, and I've been kind of curious about it. And I got this for quite a nice price. So it's a slightly flawed album, I think, but worth grabbing if you see it going for a decent price, I think. The other album which I grabbed, which I was just browsing through his stock, and I saw this. I just spotted this, and I thought, well, this is an interesting one. Wire, Manscape. Wire, seminal British post-punk band. This is a much later. Their initial heyday was the late 70s, and they released like Pink Flag. This is from their second phase after they reformed in the late 80s. So this was released in 1990. It was released on Mute, and this sees them going in a kind of an electronic direction, kind of strongly reminiscent, I think, a little bit reminiscent of Depeche Mode. Yeah, this is a pretty decent, this is an interesting album. It sees them going off in a quite experimental way. I really like Wire and all the individual kind of side projects that they did, like Dome, etc. And this is a pretty, this is a, if you're a fan of Wire, I think this is one really worth grabbing. And again, I got it for a decent price as well. So those were the two that I got from that particular seller. Now there's another seller there who also he also comes to Cork now and again, and the last record fair I went to, I bought quite a bit of stuff off him. I think I showed it a few videos back. I got the soundtrack for Zabriskie Point and a few other. I've got some really decent stuff. Now there's a couple of albums that I left behind that I reluctantly left behind that time because I just couldn't afford. There's so much stuff that other stuff that I wanted to buy that but happily two of the albums which I left behind that time, he still had them, so grabbed them with both hands this time around. One of them being a long time want list item, and that is Joni Mitchell, The Hissing of Summer Lawns. And yes, you all might say, how come I don't already have it? It's one of those albums that everybody has. But yes, myself, unfortunately, it's one of those ones that always is seen it around. There's always been some other thing that I wanted to get more. But anyway, I decided enough of it. I'd just grab it. Finally get it in my collection, because this is an absolutely superb album, as I'm sure I don't have to tell you all. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. Released in 1975. It's got that. I absolutely love that album cover. That has to be one of my favorite album covers, album arts ever, I think. My favorite track on this is the second track, The Jungle Line, which it has a kind of African drum beat superimposed with a kind of Moog synthesizer. In fact, there's some quite interesting use of Moog, also on Shadows and Light, the final track. But yeah, it's one that I've long been looking to add to my collection, and now I finally have it in my hands. And this other item, which again I was hoping that he'd still have it. Thankfully he did. This is Walter Carlos soundtrack to Clockwork Orange, or Wendy Carlos, but still called Walter Carlos at this stage. So I have two soundtracks. So this is the second soundtrack to Clockwork Orange that I have. I have the kind of official soundtrack with a different cover. The image is the poster of the movie, and now that version has kind of omits a lot of Carlos' actual original score. This album, a lot of the music on this wasn't included in the movie, so this is the entire score by Wendy Carlos, which was composed for the movie. So we get an extended version of Time Steps, which also appears in the other album, but it's a shortened version. This is the full 13 or nearly 14 minute long version of it. Also an electronic version of, I have to mention this, The Thieving Magpie, Ben Costello. We know a thieving magpie ourselves. We've often both spoken of him. Yeah, so this was released on CBS in 1972, and yeah, superb condition, and it's a must for anyone who's a fan of Wendy Carlos and of early electronic Moog music in general. Now, staying with electronic music, now this is something totally unexpected. Just happened to find this, and I thought, well, this is one I wasn't planning on buying quite so many records, but when I came across this one, I just had to grab it. This is okay. Maybe a bit of background on this album. White Noise was an experimental electronic music act formed in the late 60s by David Vorhaus, who was a British-based American musician, and Delia Derbyshire, she was responsible for the original Doctor Who theme. Now that was released back in 1969. This is he went on to record two more, or maybe I think actually maybe four more in total. But this is number 3 in the series, and this came out in 1980, more than a decade after the original White Noise album. So this is called Re-Entry, White Noise 3. And this is a kind of a concept album on basically, as it says in the sleeve notes, a musical voyage through outer and inner space by David Vorhaus, and it's all these it's basically just on the theme of space voyage. This album sounds slightly more of its time, its time being 1980. It does have this kind of late 70s, early 80s. Some of the tracks in it have a slightly almost kind of electronic disco kind of a feel, kind of Giorgio Moroder kind of a feel. But it does sound kind of its time, but it's still I really like this album. It's a must if you like, kind of spacey electronic. I wouldn't quite compare it to Klaus Schulze. It's quite different style to his now, but if you like that sort of thing, if you like Klaus Schulze, or if you like kind of Berlin School, you will, I think, enjoy this. So oh yeah, it was released in 1980 on a label called Pulse, and I must show that label. That's a fantastic label, and again, this is in superb condition, like pretty much everything I bought from that seller. And okay, I got one more item from that seller, and this is one I was with Ben, and when Ben spotted this, Ben said, "You have to get this." Okay, this is an album by Christy Moore. Christy Moore, he's kind of an institution here in Ireland. He's one of the most kind of popular and successful folk singers or interpreters of folk song in this country. He's kind of become, well, I'm not a fan of his. He's kind of become kind of to the point where he just goes through the motions. I suppose, but this is an early album by him. This is his second solo album, which came out in 1972. This is called Prosperous, and this is a great lineup on this. Liam O'Flynn, Donal Lunny, Andy Irvine. Basically, it's the lineup which would go on to form Planxty. This is released on an Irish label called Tara, and this is kind of quite a hard enough to find album, but it was priced only at €5, so like I've seen this in a while go for a lot more than that, and that was really quite a reasonable price for it, especially as it's in pretty good condition. So as Irish folk music goes, this is certainly one worth grabbing, because mainly for I'm not so much a fan of his more recent stuff from recent stuff from maybe about the mid 80s onwards, but this is him in his prime, Christy Moore, doing superb interpretations of traditional Irish ballad songs, and backed by a great lineup of musicians. And Ben is a resident, the VC's resident folk expert, so he certainly, highly recommended it to me, and he wasn't wrong. Okay, so that's it. I will be throwing up Gimme 10 on probably on Saturday, but I have some other stuff to show as well, which hopefully I'll get around to showing before the visit of Santa Claus. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody, and hope everyone is going to have a great weekend, and see you next time.